So before I jump into list this week, just a couple housekeeping. You guys have assignments 1 and your quiz graded. I'll get assignment 2 graded here shortly. Biggest things I'm catching on those is not setting your file name correctly. So please read this post here. Remember that it's supposed to be your name, first name, last name, assignment, and then whatever the assignment number is. A lot of people are just saying assignment 1. And starting next week, I'll start taking off for that because it makes it a really hard pain to grade when I have 50 people say assignment 1. So please put your name on that. Make sure that you're getting those initial comments up at the top. Let's see, what else was I seeing? Just following directions, making sure that you're actually doing what it's asking for. So if I'm asking for a variable called my input, make sure you call it my input. And make sure that if it has a capital in it, that you're using the capital. Remember that capitalization matters in Python. The other thing that I'm seeing a lot of is just simple grammar, spelling, punctuation. You're all in college. So starting next week or assignment 2 here, I'm just going to start counting off for that. It's not that hard to get capital letters at the start of a sentence and periods at the end of a sentence, that kind of stuff. Anybody have any questions over the assignments? So again, assignment 1 and quiz 1 should be your final scores there. I'll get assignment 2 graded this week. So for this week, we have lists. There are no assignments for this week. So we'll just be covering this course material here today, and then we'll be following up with some of it on Thursday. So lists are going to be another data type that you're going to use, and it's probably the most common one you'll use. The idea is that it can contain multiple values, and it's in an ordered sequence. So the key word there is ordered sequence. A list value refers to the list itself and not the values inside of the list value. So a list value typically looks something like what you see on the screen here, where you have square brackets. Then you have values inside of it. In this case, we have a bunch of strings like cat, bat, rat, and elephant inside that list. All strings will need to be typed in single quotes, just like you would anywhere else in Python code. And you could do things that are comma delimited. So these all need to be commas, space, and then in there. That space isn't absolutely necessary. They could have comma and then just immediately start with the next one. But I encourage you to use spaces in there so it looks nice and clean. That's also part of PEP 8 compliance in there. So if we look at these examples here, you could have things like integers in here. So 1, 2, 3. You could have these strings. You could have a combination of everything in there. So you could have a string, a floating point, a Boolean. Does anybody remember what this data type was? Don't overthink it.
Like an empty value?
Right, but what's the name of that type, that data type? It's none, right? Don't overthink it. So this nuns are none data types. This one here is a what? 42 would be a integer, right? And that's different than this one, which was a float. Does anybody remember what this true was? Booleans. Perfect. So when you specify a list, you'll give it a variable name. Doesn't matter what you call it. In this case, we're going to call it spam. We say equals, and then we start our list. And that way, spam from here on out is this entire list with all these variables inside of it. Now, to get those variables back out, we have to give them the index. And so the index is what we're going to be working with. The index is an integer that's inside of squared brackets on the inside. So for example, if we look at this one here, we have spam equals, then we have a list, cat, bat, rat, and elephant. Cat is equal to spam with a square bracket of 0 inside of it. So this spam part refers to the name of the variable that you have over here. This 0 is the indentation of which index you're working with. So this is the part that trips people up. It starts at 0. It does not start at 1. So 0, 1, 2, and 3. You'll also notice that that makes the last index 1 less than the size of the list. So if I did len on spam here, right, I would get back what? 4. If I tried to use that to put 4 inside of spam here, I would get wrong. So I would have to do 4 minus 1 to always get the index that I was looking for. Anybody have any questions on lists so far? Okay. So again, if I pull up some examples here. And then here we'll start a new shell or a new script. And so we would have something like spam equals 1, 2, 3, 4. Note that that is different than spam 2 of 1, 2, 3, 4. One is using integers. This one is using strings. So there's a difference between when you're working with those. If I wanted to get the first one out of spam, I would ask for spam 0. That's going to return me a 1 back to the screen. Now, because that's an integer, I could do math and say something like spam 0 plus spam 1, which is the next one in the list. And I should get back an integer value at this point. So I could say number equals that, and I would get number back as a number and say print number. If I run said script, notice I get back 3. So 1 plus 2 equals 3. Now, if I tried to do the same with this, saying number 2 equals spam 2, 0 plus spam 2, 1. Now, if I go to print number 2, I would get what back? What's that?
They wouldn't add like just get 1 and 2.
Right. What would it display on the screen though? There you go. So because it's taking 2 strings and putting them together and concatenating them, we end up with 12, which we know isn't adding up 1 and 2, right? So again, the big thing here is knowing the index of each one. If you don't know how many things are inside of spam 2, you can calculate that by going to len of spam 2, right? So I'm passing this list into len. I'm going to get a number back. In this case, I'm just going to print that right away. Or actually, let's do this. Len spam 2 equals len of that. Then I can print that. That's another thing I saw in the homeworks. You guys were starting variables with a capital letter. Don't do that. Right now it'll work, but you guys will have issues later on down the road. So make sure you're not starting variables with capital letters. So if we run this, you'll notice that 4 is getting me the total length of this list. If I want to get the last one in the list, right now, the easiest way for me to do that is to do that -1, right? So I could say print spam 2. Then I can say the len of spam 2 -1. So if we look inside of this to see what's all going on, we have the len of spam 2. It's going to calculate. We've done that. Gives us back 4. -1 gives us 3. And so we're going to call spam 3 essentially is what that's going to evaluate down to, which should give us back the number 4 again. And there we go. Okay. If you try to ask for something that doesn't exist, so say I forgot that -1 in there, you're going to get an error that says list index out of range. And that just means that because this evaluated down to 4 and asked for spam 2 with 4 inside the square brackets, that doesn't exist in here. So we have to we'll pop this error back out. You want to make sure that your indexes are integers and not slices. So for example, up here, if I say spam 1 and I do 1.0, so it's a float, it's going to cause an error. So I have to give back integers inside of there. Now, because a list can store different data types, right? We have integers up here, we have number or strings down here. You can also have a combination of them. So if I say spam 3 equals 1, 2, and I can also have another data type that we've already used, for example, a list. So I can have a list inside of a list at one of these spots. Inside this inner list, I'm going to have 1 and 2, and then I close my list. So notice that in this particular index of my overall list, I have another list. If I want to get a number or something out of here, one of these indexes in here, I start with my variable name, spam3. You give us the index that you want of the outer list. So in this case, it's going to be what? What index is this? 2, right? Whoops. So 2, and then you start again with another bracket of the inner list of what variable you want. So say we want to get the 1 out of there, the string of 1. Be 0, right? So if we do this and we print it, we should get back this variable or this index here. Now it's out of range. That's because I changed this up here, right? So we need to go back to this -1. There we go. So we got that 1 back. So if you have nested lists, that's what that's called, where you have lists inside a list, then you start with the outer list that you want along with the inner list that you want. And you could do a list inside of a list inside of a list. You can go as deep as you need it to go. Now, a lot of times what you'll see if you're doing a long list of things, so we talked about spam equals cat, bat, rat, and elephant. You can put this in your script like this, or sometimes it's easier to do it like this, where if you go to the end and press enter, notice how it aligns them all in a row in a column like that. Sorry, not a row, but a column. And it makes it much easier to read. So if you have a lot of variables inside of a list, I strongly recommend that you do this fashion and you can move your way down. This trailing square bracket can either be like this or it can be at the end of the line before it. Doesn't matter. But if you have a whole lot of things, say you have a lot of long strings, you could have a bunch of sentences, you could have a bunch of other stuff in there. It's nicer to put it in this format if it starts to get too long. The key here is you don't want it to run off the right-hand portion of this screen. It makes the script hard to read. Like, yes, I could full screen this, but if I write strings that come clear over here, when I go to run that script, it's going to wrap and do some weird things. So it's always best to try to keep it in this smaller screen. This keeps you at 80 column widths, which is a standard terminal when people try to run your program. Anybody have any questions of that? Okay, so remember 0 is what would get us back cat here. Instead of having to calculate the entire length of this list and then try to figure out what this last one is of elephant, instead we can just call it as spam -1. And what -1 does is it starts in the reverse order and gives us elephant. -2 is rat, -3 is bat, -4 is cat. So you can use negative indexes in order to do it from the reverse order. Anybody have any questions about that? Okay. The next part that we have is called slices. And so the way slices work is, say I just wanted to get back bat and rat out of this list and return a smaller list. So to do that, I go with spam, and I want to go with bat. So what is bat's index? 1, right? Because remember, we start at 0. Then you're going to use a colon, and then you want to give me the last one, including what it is. So if I want rat, what would I put here? I guess I need to say it goes, what's the number up to, but not including. So rat is what index? 2, right? And then we're going to add 1 to that to say 3. It's kind of like the range command. It's going up to, but not including. So if I get spam 13 back and I print this to the screen, I'm going to get rid of this older stuff up here. Oops. Fortunately, I trashed the list I was just working on. There we go. All right. So we'll notice it comes back with a list of its own with bat and rat in there. Remember, we had to use 3 and not 2 because we want to go up to, but not including. So with that inner list, I can now do something like rat, and I could just add that 0 in there, and that's going to give me back the 0 index of my new list. Therefore, I just get bat back. So if I want a smaller subset of the lists in there, and I want to get what's called a slice, I want a chunk from here to here. Now on that first one, say I wanted to include cat in my list that I was slicing out, what would I put here? Right now we're starting at bat. I want to start at cat. So I would do what? Replace the 1 with a 0, right? Notice how, because I asked for the 0 index here, that changed the output of my program because now the new 0 index is cat. So you have to be careful when you're doing these slices and then you adjust the original list. It's also going to change your list index numbers. You can also leave off the 0 and just say :3. You're going to get the same effect. So that means start at the left, give me everything up to index 3, but not including 3. All right, anybody have any questions on that? It also works in the reverse order. So say I wanted to get a list back of starting with elephant and going backwards, I would start with -1, and then I could go up to whatever I wanted. So if I wanted -3, that should return me what list? Here's a trick. So the difference here is you want to start at 0 and then work your way back. It's kind of not intuitive. So if I run it from 0 to -3, now I'm going to get back cat, which isn't quite exactly what we want. -3 to -1. Now we got back bat and rat. See how we did that? It starts at -3, moves back. We could also go to 0. So when you go in reverse order on these, they can be a little tricky. You kind of have to play with them to make sure you're getting back what you wanted. In this case, if I flip it and go -1 to 0, there again, I'm not going to get anything back because it goes including but not up to. So I have to do something like -2. There you go. Still not going to get it because I have to adjust the number on the right-hand side. Okay. Let's see, length, we talked about that one. So you can pass the entire list into the len function. You can get back the total length of it. Remember that if you want to get that value back, you would want to use like a -1 if you're going to use that as a way of calculating the index that you want to get. or if you wanted to calculate the last index of the whole thing. So this tells us how we start out with a list of a bunch of different variables. We may want to do different things to that list. For example, because this isn't a ordered list, that's why we start with an index of 0, 1, 2, 3. We want to be able to change things inside that list. So for example, if we look at my list here, I have cat, bat, rat, and elephant. If I want to change cat, then I say spam, whatever the index number is of cat. So what's the index number of cat? 0, right? And I want to change that to dog. I would do this. I would have this assignment operator. So spam 0 equals dog. At that point, if I print spam, we'll see that my list changed and it permanently overwrote cat. So once it's changed from here on out, that one's moved. If I wanted to keep my old setting, but just do it temporarily, I would have to do some different stuff. But if you want to change a variable, you just use an assignment operator. You give it the name of your list. In this case, we called it spam, the index, a single equal sign, and then whatever you want to change it to. Similar to what you were doing with string concatenation and string replication, you can do the same thing here. So say I had 2 lists, spam 2 equals 1, 2, 3, 4. Put that in brackets. If I wanted to put these two together, I would just say spam plus spam 2 equals whatever it should be. So it's actually going to go the other direction. We're going to say spam 3 equals spam plus spam 2. So we're going to concatenate those two lists together. And then we are going to print spam 3 to see our new list. So we can see I have cat, bat, rat, elephant. There we go. Spam plus spam 2. Now notice it didn't end up adding 1, 2, 3, 4 in there. The reason it didn't do that is because those are, should be 2 separate lists. Did I fat finger something? Oh, thank you. I was going to say that should have worked. There you go. So it just concatenated the list, the string, the first one here with the second one and put it all together in one big list. Same way with replication. If I wanted to replicate that first one, say 3 times. Notice that I now have cat, bat, rat, elephant, cat, bat, rat, elephant. Even though it repeated these are not all the same. They all have their own index in here, right? And I could update any one of these indexes at a certain point in time. For those of you coming from other languages, lists are a lot like arrays, is what you probably use in a different language. Okay. Anybody have any questions over list concatenation and replication? Remember, that is not a math operator. So a lot of what you guys were doing in your homework assignments, I had you use math operators. The plus sign and the asterisk is not a math operator if you're not doing a number. That's the easiest way to remember it. Is the values that I have on either side of that math operator both integers? If it's not, then you're not doing a math operation, you're doing a replication or concatenation. Next step in working with lists is say we want to delete something out of our list. So we have our original list up here, and I want to remove elephant because it doesn't rhyme with everything else that's in there. So to delete it, I just use the delete command or del, spam, and then I got to pass the index of what I want to delete. So if I want to remove elephant, it's what? 3, right? So del 3. Now if I print spam again, just print. Notice that it trimmed it out of the list and I have a whole new list. I know I'm quizzing you on the indexes a lot, but this is the part that trips everybody up all semester long. So if you don't get it right from the beginning, it makes for bad homework assignments. I don't want you guys to have that on quizzes and such. So the more practice you can do with it, the better, to try to remember how indexes work. Because in Python, there's things that start at 0, there's things that start at 1, there's things that start with this index and goes up to in it, but not including, that kind of thing. So keeping them straight, you have to just practice. You can also try to delete something if you try to delete something that's not there. So say instead of spam 3, I deleted spam 4. I'm going to get an error message that says that index is out of range again because there is no spam 4. You can use these to your advantage, right? Because remember the whole try and accept that we did before. So if you try to remove spam, spell correctly here, try to delete spam 4, and on an exception, instead of getting that error message that says it's out of range, we can print our own error message that says that value does not exist. Which one makes the program continue on. It doesn't crash it, but it lets the user know that that particular value didn't exist. So you can use try and accept with any command that you want to do. You can try, if it doesn't work, you can accept. If I want to specifically do an exception on index error, I just change this accept to index error. And now I know that that particular index does not exist. So we can say that index does not exist. Something like that. And so what we could do is write a little mini program based on the things that we have built so far. So if we started, we have spam like this. We can start out and say print, welcome to my program. Then we're going to say print the current list is like that. And then what we could do is we can loop through that list. And we're going to talk about that here in a little bit, but this is a good reason to do that. So if you remember for I in range of 0 to 5, I should get back what numbers? Yep, exactly. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, because it's 5, but it goes up to, but does not include in the range command. What range command actually does here is it creates a list with those numbers in it. And then you're just looping through that list. So range 0, 5 is the equivalent of having a list that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And as we go through that for loop, we need to put in back in here. We're assigning I to 1. The next time we go through, I becomes 2, I becomes 3, I becomes 4, and I 5. So we can loop through a list just the same way. Range command is just giving us a number range, automatically generating that list for us. So say we have a list up here and we're going to call it spam. We can say for I in spam, which means it's going to loop through this list, assign I for it, and then we can actually print what that is out. So print I. And then once we're done, we can do a simple print. This will give us some spacing. And we could actually change something inside of there. So we could ask the user for the number. We could say something like print, would you like to change an index? Or let's see this. Which index would you like to change? If none, enter none. Okay. So now if we're going to print that inside of there, then what we can do is we need to do a check, right? So if, and we need to get an input from them. So we're going to say index equals input. Let's get a variable from them. We can first off check right off the bat if, index is equal to none. Then print nothing changed. We can have an elif. What do we want to do on the elif? We could do it this way, else. And we could do a try, and we need to convert that to a number, right? Remember when they type in on an input, it's a string, we got to convert it to a number so that we can test to make sure that we're getting the valid input. We're going to go in here and put this into a while loop, like we learned last week. This whole thing into a while true. And on this try, we can say int none. We just set this to the new variable. So index equals int none. And if that works, then what we want to do is change that input. So we could say print, what would you like to change that input to? New variable or new value equals input. Now, there's a couple of things that we should probably check before, right? We can try to convert that over to a number. That's good, but then we need to make sure that that number they gave us is a valid index. So what could we do to check that? So we got the index that they gave us, and we converted it to an integer, so we can check right off the bat whether or not they gave us a number, but then we need to check if it's a valid index. So how could we calculate the index of the list that we printed before? Or calculate what could be a valid number? Remember your length function? So we could say if index in range, starting with 0 to the length of our list, spam, -1, right? Remember, we got to do the -1 because it's only a valid index if it's one less. Make sure I got all my curves right here. Yep. So what this range command is going to do is generate a list for us that starts with 0 and goes all the way up to whatever the length of spam was. In this case, we're going to end up with what? We're going to end up with a weird number, right? So because spam is actually equal to 0, and we get -1 as the max number up to, but not including, we'll end up getting a list that's basically empty, which is what our list currently is anyway. But if they try to give us a number like, say, 5, it's going to tell us it's out of range, and we can give them back a message that says it's not there. So if index is in there, now we can say, what would you like to change it to? Grab the new value and say spam index, because that's the index that they gave us that they wanted us to change, is equal to our new value. Then we could say print spam, and that would print out the new list and go through there. Now, if we say else, then we want to tell them that that is not a valid index. And at this point, we would want to continue, right? And on this section, we could break out of it if they gave us a valid input. That kicks us out of our while true loop, so we can get all the way out of there. We need to come back here. Notice we have a try, which means we need to get an exception. And this means that they gave us either a non-integer or they gave us an invalid index, one or the other, right? In this case, it's actually just going to be numbers, the only thing that would really kick us out. So that is not a valid index as well, or that is not a valid input, rather. They could have just typed in a random name. So a real simple list at this point. Let's go ahead and actually give it some values. So cat, bat, rat, elephant, now, there's a couple places that we want to print a list. When we print a list out to a user, we don't want to just dump the list on the screen. In other words, I shouldn't see this in your programs where I'm seeing the square brackets. It's much cleaner if I see you do a for loop through it and print it out that way. So instead of doing this every single time that we have like this print spam, we wrote basically a little mini function here to print this out. So if you guys remember functions, we can call this print list. You pass us in a list, so we could say my list. We're going to tab this in and say the current list, instead of calling it spam, it's actually going to be called my list. And then it will print it out nice and clean and do a function at the end. So we're going to move this to the top. Remember that all functions need to be before you start writing code. And now anytime I want to print my list, I can just call that print list function with whatever list I want to print. So if I say print spam, instead of print spam, I actually want print list, as I now have my new function that will print out the list in a nice clean way. So if I run this program as it stands right now, notice how it says, here it is. Notice how it put each one on a nice line there. That's much better than getting something like this as an output. So all of your lists, when you guys start working on your projects and such, I should not see this type of thing dumped to the screen. I should see you roll through it like this. And it's real simple. You just do a simple for loop to print it out. If you're going to do it multiple times in your program, it would be smart to make that a little mini function up here that you could call out. Now you may end up saying, instead of the current list is this, you may do a check on the length of that list to see if it's there. If it doesn't have anything, you could just say that list is empty, right? Makes for a much cleaner program than saying the current list is, and then there's nothing there. So a simple calculation up here, if my list, in this case, it's going to be the len of my list equals 0, print list is empty, else go ahead with the rest of this code. Now it's going to print out the same input, but if for some reason this spam had nothing in it, and we just had something like spam empty list, it's going to say list is empty versus trying to spit it out. Much cleaner output. Okay. So we have our project now, and it says, what index would you like to type in? If we say none, then we say nothing's changed, and it just keeps us in this loop forever, right? So we need to make sure that after this nothing's changed, we go ahead and do a what in order to get out of this loop? Break, right? So now if I type none, nothing's changed and the program ends. Let's rerun this. Ask what list we would like to change. If we say 5, we get that's not an invalid, or that is not a valid input, which means our try did not work. So something in here caused that not to work. This part of the step worked because we were able to convert a 5 into an integer. If index in range of 0 to whatever the list is, this right here would have failed. Right? It's actually going to come down and say that's not here, but something actually broken here. And so we need to figure out what that is. In order to figure out what that is, we just take it outside of a try and accept. So we can come back out of here, take our try out. Let's dedent that. Whoops. Dedent. We're going to take this out. We can go here. And it's because none is not defined, right? So because I put none here, that's actually what's causing my program to crash. Not anything else that was over here. It's because I had the word none here. So let's go back. And I'm showing you this because this is a great way to troubleshoot. If you're always getting this exception, you may be getting it for the wrong purpose because you're using a catch-all exception versus something like name error. So we could say except on name error. Print is not a valid variable name. Instead of crashing our program. Otherwise, we can do our core except, which is our catch-all, and do everything else. Let's try it again here. So make sense here in a second when we try to do it. So 5, we're going to come back and say that's not a valid variable name. So we need to fix this, and this shouldn't be none. It should be what? Index, right? Okay, so now we put 5, and now we say that's not a valid index, which means we hit this if saying that 5 was not in our range. So we know that that's actually true. Now, instead of trying to do all this calculation of everything in here, what could I do? Remember, if I get an index that doesn't exist, I get this error message, right? Index is not valid based on an index error. So instead of me trying to do this whole calculate this range and all that, I could just try to execute this code here. Get rid of this else. And I could go write my own exception for that on index error and print that is not a valid index. Please try again. Much less code, right? I don't have to worry about my if statements. I don't have to figure out to calculate the range, make sure it's valid. If it doesn't exist in the index, it's going to just tell me that right off here. So use the stuff that's built into Python to take care of it for you. If you're getting this red code, you can always do an exception on name error, write your own error so that your program doesn't crash. So now if I say 5, it's going to come back with that is not a valid index and start us over. Let me try that again here. 5. So that's not a valid input. I shouldn't be getting valid input. I should have gotten this exception here that that's not valid.
You accidentally typed it here.
Oh, you're right. Let's try that again. So in here, I got a problem, right? I typed in 5 and it says, what would you like to change that input to? And it's doing it right away because it's checking to see if that's an index. So what I need to do is try to check something up here to make sure that I have a valid index. So I could say something like, what? Spam is the name of my list, right? Index is the stuff I typed in. I got to convert that to an integer so I could do index like this. So I'm going to first try to convert whatever they typed into an integer. That's that check to make sure they gave us an actual number. If it is valid, then let's go ahead and just try to immediately grab that index. If that's not valid, now we're going to hit this index error. Let's try it again here. So in this case, we can say that's not a valid input. We could say that's not a valid number, or that is not a number, something like that. And then we get our error messages to be a little cleaner and we know why we're getting it. So 5, now I get that's not a valid index. Please try again. That took out all that if else, calculate the range and all that goofy stuff. I don't have to do that. So now if that's not there, name error, I should, in theory, never hit that unless I type something goofy up here. But if I typed in something like ASDF, I'm going to say that's not a number. ask for an index. If I type none, program ends and we're good. So now let's actually give it a valid index and say 0. And it says, what would you like to change that input to? We could put Sam. And it's going to say that's not a number. So why would we get that's not a number on this exception? What's that? It wants an integer here, right? Because we changed the code that we had up above calculating it. So let's take this. We're going to just copy this down to here so that we can actually specify a new value in. Remember that we also have to, this is actually going to set that. So we're good. So let's run it. We say 0 and we want to change that to dog. Then it says the new list, and instead of current list, which is fine, that's what we want. So now it's dog, bat, rat, and elephant. So we have a little mini program that can manipulate a list at this point. All we did was just change what's there. The other one that we have is the ability to delete a list. So after we ask them, well, let's put it this way. Everything that we did in here was code that was based on what? We were doing what to a list? We did, but we were trying to get valid input to do what? What's that? Yeah, we wanted to change an index, right? So let's create this as its own little mini function. Change list. Again, we're going to pass in whatever this list is. And we're going to move this entire while loop into this little function. Make sure we get all of our spacing the way it's supposed to be. While true, if, else. Okay, that all looks good. And we got our loop. So now we're going to print this original list in, and we could ask somebody, what would you like to do? And essentially we're creating a menu system at this point. So we could say print 1, change index. Or print 0, exit program. Back when I get my other quote in here. And so now we need to get that input from that user, so we can call it choice equals input. Whoops, let's get our input from the user. Okay, we want to make sure that whatever they type in was actually valid input. So let's put this into a while true. We get the input, we need to check what? If it is if choice equals 0, right? Now we could convert that over to a number, then we got to do the whole try and accept and all that. Just take their input. We know it's going to be a string, keep it as a string. If it's 0, we want to end the program. Does anybody remember how we end a program? Close, sys exit, right? Good call. So we got to do what? We got to import sys in order to use sys exit. And here we could say print, thanks for using my program. And then we'll call sys.exit. That will end it if they put in the 0 in our menu. Otherwise, we can say elif choice equals 1. Then we want to call our change index program that we had up here. So change list is what we called it. Change list. And we're going to pass in spam because that's the list we're working with. Once we're done, we're going to do an else. And on the else, we could just tell them that they didn't give us a valid menu choice. So that is not a valid menu choice. Let's try again. And it's going to start this while loop back over again. So let's try out our new little program. Welcome to my program. We dump out what the current list is. What would you like to do? 1 to change the index, 0 to exit the program, 0. Thanks for using my program. It ends. If we come in here, we use 1. Now we're going to call back up to that function that we wrote earlier. And everything and all the code that we wrote in there is going to perform the same. So if we say none, nothing changed, right? That breaks us out of this while loop. It puts us back to the original menu. So what should I do with this original menu? Like right now, the user doesn't realize that they're actually here waiting to type in an index or the menu choice. The key is here, when you guys ask for an input, make sure that whatever question you're asking is inside that while true, because when it starts over again, it's going to need that data inside of there. Again, this is a common mistake that people make. Okay, so now if I say 1, I want to change the index. I say none, nothing changed. It kicked me right back to the menu. And now I can continue on. And because I'm stuck in a while loop, I actually have a real program now. It's not going to just run something and quit. It's going to keep me in this menu till I tell them I'm done. But I could also add a multiple things to this menu. Right now, I just have change index, but now we could write a separate function to delete. Since we know how to do that, we can say def delete index. We pass it to my list again. And we can simply say del, actually we need to ask them again, which one do they want to delete? Print, which index would you like to delete? If none, enter none. Now we want to do that if none, enter none, right? Because if they accidentally pick that menu option and we force them to do an index, they're going to have to delete something out of there. So we need that small little check in there for an if none. We're going to just steal our code that we have here. If index, nothing changed, try, because it's going to be similar. All right, now we're going to try our code. And we can say delete spam, or I'm sorry, it's not spam. And I need to change this. This is not spam. Why was this code working up here? Does anybody remember? So spam is a what in this whole list? Had to deal with functions. You're right. Spam is a global variable. My list is what we're actually calling it inside of our little mini routine, our function here. So this should say my list. This here should say my list. New value. And we could change this one to my list. Now the problem is that's only going to be valid for inside this function, right? We want to change our global variable, which means I need what up here? Global spam, right? That's how I can edit my outside list, which means I shouldn't be passing a list into here to change anything. So I'm just going to get rid of that. We'll keep it as spam, but each one of these should be global spam so that we can edit this outside list. All right, let's make sure that I fix all these back up where they need to be. Now this my list up here, we do want to keep because we're going to pass in whatever we're taking in. This is going to be spam. Okay. So this little mini function we had here was to try to delete that. We're going to say spam int whatever we typed in, which was index, so that we have a number, and try to delete it. We can also do our exception here. So except on index error. Use this same text that we have up here. We can go our catch-all except and copy our same thing right here. That's going to try to get us in here. Let us save it. Let us error it. Once we actually change it, then we need to break out of our loop and send us back. Let's take a look at our program. So we have a program, we have our list. We want to change the index. And notice that change list takes one positional argument. So let's go up to change list. Change list does not. Oh, here I was calling it. Sorry. There we go. There you go. 1, change our index. 5, index doesn't exist. 0, dog, and it prints out the new list. We're back. Now, we don't have a menu option in order to call delete index, so we got to create another one here. So print to delete index. Then we need to go to our if list and make sure that we give that an actual elif choice equals 2. We're going to call delete index. We'll go through and do that. All right. So now we have a new menu option. 1. We're going to change that to dog. Notice that our bat got changed to dog up here, but now we want to delete that one entirely. Go to 2. If we give it invalid input, our sanitization is still working. If we get it an invalid index, it's also sanitizing it. So if we want to delete bat, we give it a 1. Or we want to delete dog, we give it a 1. And now we have it back out here. Now notice we didn't print out the result at the end, so we should probably do that. Before we break, we call print list spam. Just check that one, 2, 1, and it deleted it out of there. Bat is no longer in this list. So we have this nice little program. The reason I'm going through and showing you this is your guys' midterm projects are going to start to build something like this. When you guys are starting to build more advanced projects, which we're 4 weeks away from at this point, but you guys would, this part is the part that everybody struggles with in the midterm. So I wanted to kind of give you an example of how you'd build a menu system out. Notice the advantage is having your options out here in different functions so that you can call those individual functions down here. Now there's even better ways to do this, because right now, if I want to add a new menu item, I have to come in here, add it in my print statement, and then I have to come down here in my elif and add that option in there as well. But there's other ways that we can make that even easier later on. This is a good start. That's where I'm going to hold for today. When we get back on Thursday, we're going to start really working with lists and doing some different things with it. Right now, all we can do is change things, but we need to add something to a list. We may need to do some other things inside of it. We've talked about using for loops, ends and not ends. We can start doing that.